Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by Miguel Silva. Miguel, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. A little bit of a sickness after 10 days of being in the national team setting, but otherwise I feel good and I'm excited to talk to you. Yeah,
Miguel's loaded up on caffeine and pulling himself off the sofa to get
yeah,
some quality content across to the listeners. So we've got to appreciate it today. Now, thank you for coming on, mate. I just talked to you, but then as we just before we started recording, just saying you're following a number of coaches that have been at Malmo, or currently at Malmo as well. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but it's great to get you on as well and sort of not complete the team because I know there's still practitioners that we
yeah,
haven't had on, and maybe one day we'll get through them all.
yeah.
But we'll dive into that a little bit in terms of your experiences over at the club. But just give us a little bit of background on yourself to start.
Yep, for sure. The funny thing, like you mentioned, there's that long list of practitioners, but not many of them have a non-English name. So maybe I can start with that, as you maybe have noticed. Portuguese name, but then an English accent coming out of nowhere randomly. I was born in Portugal, left there when I was about 6 years old, moved over to England. So I grew up in a place called Worcester, just outside Birmingham. As I was growing up, as you can imagine, being Portuguese, you were kind of pushed down to the route of football. So I played in the academy setting until I was about 15, 16. Thankfully for me at that age, I was pretty mature to realize I'm good at football, but I'm not that good at football. So very, yeah, in some ways, very fortunate looking back to have that realization at such a young age. I exited then the academy setting. I went down the college and university route. So following my time in academy, I went to Harper College, which was quite sports science based, but very focused on football. At this point, I knew that the next best thing for me was to work in the environment of football, but I didn't know what specifically, whether it was to be a coach. When I was in the academy setting, we didn't have strength and conditioning coaches then at that time. So I wasn't really fully aware of that industry and that possibility there, but I just wanted to be around football at that time. Once I finished at Harbury, I went to Cardiff Metropolitan University in South Wales. So then, as you can imagine, when I was there, I was so fortunate to be introduced to the world of strength and conditioning. I had some amazing mentors over there: Rodri Lloyd, John Oliver, John Radner. The list goes on and on over there at Cardiff. Met some amazing practitioners, but they're the ones that introduced the world of strength and conditioning to me. And like I mentioned, Rodri Lloyd, John Oliver, leading practitioners as well in the field of long-term athletic development and adolescent athletes. So after being introduced to that topic there, I realized very quickly this is what I want to do. I want to be a strength conditioning coach, a sports scientist within the industry of football. So I completed my bachelor's there. Had an amazing time, but unfortunately, at the end of that 3 years, there was no internships or work experience opportunities really going in South London or even back in Worcestershire, back in my hometown in England at that time. So I had to look around and I thankfully found two internships over in Scotland in a city called Paisley, just outside of Glasgow. Um, yeah, it was a big sacrifice to just say goodbye to all my friends and family that I had in South Wales and in Worcester. But I realized that if I really wanted to get my foot on the ladder, if I wanted to get my foot in the door in this industry, that this was the only option. So overnight, after I finished my bachelor's, got my car, found an apartment in the city of Paisley, and moved myself up there. One of the internships was a place called Glasgow School of Sport. It's a performance school based in Glasgow, where the best hockey players, the best badminton players, swimmers, athletics, a bunch of these athletes that represent Scotland at a youth level would go to the school and they would have strength conditioning sessions actually built into their curriculum and their school time activities. So this was a really interesting environment for me to go and work from a multi-sport perspective. Actually, as far as working in football, you think to yourself all the time, imagine if this player had the plyometric ability of a basketball player. Imagine if this guy was as robust as a rugby player. Imagine if he was as fast as a sprinter. But then actually having been exposed to that, there's so many little things that I've picked up along the way. And, a lot of the shoulder work I do with my goalkeepers now, I just stole from the work that I was doing with the swimmers over there. So that was a fantastic opportunity. I was an intern there, but the head coaches weren't so available during my experience there. So despite being an intern, then I was pretty much also leading and mentoring some of the other interns there. So, but a really good experience nonetheless. Alongside that, I started working at St. Mirren Football Club on like a part-time basis, just a few nights a week. But then again, I just kept showing up and kept offering myself as much as possible. And, when started going from 1 or 2 nights a week to 3 nights a week to 4 nights a week to 5 nights a week, to the point where I was, again, essentially working a part-time job there on an internship basis. But again, working with some of the best football players that Scotland has to offer in a club like St. Mirren, where they haven't got the finances and resources of your Celtic and Rangers, so they have to promote internally a lot. So actually being able to work with athletes, knowing that there's a good percentage that these guys will actually go on to at least train with the first team at some point, it was really motivating. And again, a fantastic experience all around. But as I mentioned, I moved up to Scotland, and both of these opportunities were internships. So I wasn't getting paid for either of them. So to keep myself financially afloat, I was working sometimes night shifts in factories. I was working weekends. Sometimes if I was working in the evening at St. Mirren and in the school time at Glasgow School of Sport, maybe if I had 4 hours in between, I would quickly try and find some sort of agency work just to keep myself financially afloat. And then alongside that, I also 5 days before the course started at the University of Edinburgh, I decided to quickly enroll into a master's. My original idea was that let's take a gap year and try and gain loads of practical experience, and then we come back and keep the ball rolling. But then I realized if I don't come back now, maybe I don't come back ever at all. And I realized how important it was to have a master's if I wanted to go far in this industry. So 5 days before the course started, I also enrolled in that. So 2 essentially part-time jobs that were internships, an actual paying job that was primarily night shifts and weekend work, and then another master's that was essentially a part-time, just 2 or 3 times a week, travel over to Edinburgh and study, sometimes remotely or sometimes in person. But yeah, I had to juggle that for about 6 months. After 6 months, the head of Academy Fitness left St. Mirren, and because of how hard and how much I'd sacrificed, they chose to promote me. So after 6 months, then I got the head of academy gig there, where then I was in charge of the whole long-term athletic development curriculum. Bearing in mind I'd only left university 6 months prior to that, so I still didn't really know what I was doing. So my first protocol was just to carry on what was already done, and then where possible, when I found these small little gaps to expand on what we were already doing, then I experimented it. I was quite mature to realize that this is probably one of those situations where I can afford to make these small little mistakes sooner rather than later. So I threw a lot at the wall to see what would stick, and I think that experience of just being willing to make a few mistakes and take it on the chin and hold myself accountable for those mistakes, it really shaped my philosophy going forward. But yeah, after 6 months, got promoted to head of the academy, and then another 3 or 4 months later, the fitness coach that was in charge of the reserve team left. The academy structure was that the academy trained in the evenings after school, and then the reserve team and the first team trained in the mornings. So then I did both roles simultaneously. In the morning, I was working with the reserve team, which was the brightest academy players, sometimes supplemented with first team players that needed fitness. And then, yeah, I juggled those 2 part-time roles simultaneously to, I guess, make that a full-time job over there. After a year and a half of that, I saw an advert online for Malmo FF. I didn't think too much of it. You know how our industry can be sometimes, where clubs advertise positions, but maybe they already have someone in the door. So I applied for the role thinking some Swedish guy called Bjorn probably already had the job. So I didn't think too much of it. But to my surprise, Mark Reed got back to me, did an interview that went well. And then before you know it, I think for those not aware, in Sweden, the season runs slightly different to the rest of Europe. So on my last day at St. Mirren, we played Rangers on the Saturday. On the Sunday, I was on the plane over to Malmo. And when I arrived at Malmo, I was like, okay, I guess I can quickly just settle down some of my things and then I can go for my off-season vacation. But to my surprise, it was mid-season at Malmo at that period. So that was, again, another stressful year and a half where one full season over in Scotland and then dumped straight into the halfway point of the Swedish season and having to grind out for another 6 months. But again, it was a fantastic experience. Part of my motivation to coming to Malmo was actually just to experience a new culture and learn a new language. And again, try and make as many mistakes as possible to try and learn as much as possible. But no, it's been fantastic. I've been here for 3.5 years now. After 3.5 years, it's getting to the point now where I'm starting to see the fruit of my labor. So I was now recently with the national team and with the under 18s, and 7 out of the 20 players in that national team were Malmo FF players that when I first arrived were in the under 14s, and now they're in the under 19s with me. Likewise, later that day, for example, we played against the Netherlands on Tuesday, and then straight after that game, we went to watch the first team game in our conference room, and then it turned on the channel and the camera was already pointing at 3 other academy graduates that were here about 2 years ago, playing against Estonia in the Nations League. So yeah, after 3.5 years, amazing experience, and I'm still enjoying it day to day. After 3.5 years, I'm starting to really see the fruits of my labor. Whilst I was at Malmo, I can also mention that like I mentioned before, after 6 months of being an intern and having the opportunity to actually take a step back to learn as much as possible, I got thrown into the deep end of then being the leader person. So I only had really 6 months of actually having some sort of mentor to learn from. And I realized a year and a half ago that was something that I was lacking, like a true mentor that I could look towards to try and learn as much as possible. So then I started Shane Murphy's mentorship program. If you're familiar with Shane, the guy's incredible. He's forgotten more than I will ever know, that's for sure. But yeah, it's been a really good eye opener to realize how the true elite think and to try and just steal as much information from him as I can. So I've been doing that for the past year, and more recently, in the last 2 months, I've started working, as I mentioned, with the Swedish Federation with the under 18s. My first camp was a domestic camp here in Sweden, but most recently we went to Marbella, and we played against England 1-2-0, lost against Netherlands 2-1. But that's my journey to where I am right now, I guess.
Brilliant. No, it's great to hear. It's great to hear that you're working with Shane as well. Shane's been on the podcast a few times, and his name's come up a little bit recently with different people working with him as well, which is great to see.
Yeah.
You mentioned about obviously Mark appointing you at Malmo. Now, there's yourself, Mark, Jamie, Jared, Tom Noon, Ben Rosen, John Phillips. They've all been on the podcast. They've all been at Malmo at some point. So talk to me about your experiences at the club, because there's a lot of practitioners that are either at the club or being at the club. And you talked about the success of the players in terms of getting these players through to national teams, either age group or first team. But there's obviously a successful journey for coaches as well, with the names that I've just mentioned. And I know there's more coaches there at the minute as well. So what's been your experience at the club? Why is it different to other clubs, especially in Sweden, but out in Europe as well?
I think the main benefit that we have is that being Malmo FF, the team that's historically the best in the country. Being Malmo FF, you know you're going to work with the best players that the country has to offer. I don't know the population of Sweden off the top of my head, but regardless of what country you're working in, if you're working with the best that that country has to offer, you know that you're going to be pushing things to another level. So I think this is a big part of the success that we've all had, actually, just the exposure of working with the true elite, whether it's players that have actually been recruited at the age of 10 and worked their way up through the academy, or they've been bought from other clubs at the age of 17. Whatever it is, it's, you know, you're working with the best of the best. So you have to make sure that your physical provision is suited for that. So I don't know how to phrase it, but yeah, it just pushes you to think above and beyond. And yeah, you're over here, you're a big fish in a small pond. So again, you get to explore different avenues that maybe you wouldn't have been exposed to back in the UK, where typically, regardless of where you are, you're a small fish in a big pond. So yeah, I guess it's a sense of just the extra responsibility, the extra pressure that you experience, and then the high level of athletes that you're working with. And then I guess because of the level of the athletes that the club are recruiting, you know that they're probably going to make it anyway. It's not that we're this special. At the end of the day, we're just a small cog in this really big machine, and these athletes are the best at what they do. So we know they're going to hit the top anyway. But yeah, knowing that these are the top, well, I think you always just find another gear to yourself that you maybe otherwise weren't familiar with prior, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. If there's well, there will be coaches out there that are probably in similar positions to what you were before, in terms of took the first few opportunities, whether that be paid, unpaid, interns, roles, whatever it is they've been in. But maybe opportunities like what you've had over at Malmo come up. What would be advice for people moving abroad?
Yeah, it's difficult. Like we, for example, every year we advertise for the internship program, and every few years the possibility of actually bringing in a paid member of staff becomes available. And when I do advertise these positions, we get flooded by hundreds of people. So then it's just a case that to be considered for one of these roles, you need to somehow stand out. And in the modern age where everyone has a bachelor's, everyone has a master's, everyone has one or two pieces of experience, it's so hard to stand out. So the main thing that I'm looking for in these situations is actually about how much have they sacrificed. So sometimes just through the CV, you can see that someone's been quite comfortable, in the sense that you can see where they're from. You can see that they went to university down the road. You can see that they did some work experience on the other side of that road, which isn't an issue by any means. But when I've got two CVs on my desk, and one of them has had quite a comfortable journey like that, and then the other one has had maybe the opposite side of that, a little bit like me, where they've had to sacrifice their friends and family, they've had to work night shifts alongside multiple unpaid opportunities, then that really highlights that that person really wants this, and that they're willing to go above and beyond. And for then the recruiter like myself, that helps you stick out a tiny bit more. Because like I said, at the end of the day, every CV, when you strip it to its core, it's very similar, and it's really hard to stand out. From there, then it's also a case of just trying to promote your work as much as possible. So using places like LinkedIn to actually promote the good quality work that you do, or at least just open up to the world, and sometimes make yourself a little bit vulnerable, that you're getting in contact with other people, you're asking questions, you're again making yourself vulnerable, that you don't know everything, but that you're really willing to learn. Again, I think that helps you stand out a little bit. So these moves abroad, unless you know someone, can be really difficult, but my biggest suggestion is just put yourself out there, make yourself vulnerable. And yeah, I think By doing so, you help yourself to initiate the conversations. And then once you get the conversations and you're talking to someone, then that's a whole nother process in itself. But that's the hardest part, initiating those conversations. And I think that's what will open the door, if that answers your question.
It does, and I like the point on the sort of CVs as well, because I think that's a really important point. Like you say, I'm sure for jobs like that you put out on other clubs, the number of applicants now must be pretty crazy. So, and again, like you've mentioned, similar qualifications and things like that. So that those points of standing out at the time when you were doing night shifts and things like that, I'm sure you weren't thinking, oh, this is going to look great on my CV to work in football, but it does, doesn't it? Because it shows that commitment. In terms of the internship program that you've got running at the club, I'm keen to hear about your lessons from being an intern and then how you've applied that to the internship that's now available at the club.
Yeah. So again, when I reflect on my own internships, like I kind of mentioned at Glasgow School of Sport, you were told what to do, and then you were given a lot of responsibility. You had to self-manage. If you had any issues, then okay, for sure you can go and ask questions, but they were also busy elsewhere. So the main aspect there was actually about being competent and being able to handle the workload and responsibility given to you. Over at St. Mirren, there was a little bit more support, but again, when I reflect, there was the head of the academy, and then there was a few part-time interns, but each intern was assigned a different day. But on any given day, maybe you have 3 or 4 teams training almost at the same time. So someone needs to be in the gym and someone needs to be on the pitch. So again, you didn't have the luxury of being mentored. You didn't have the luxury of someone actually watching you deliver a session and then sit down with you for the next half an hour to reflect and tell you what was good, what was bad, ask you the questions to get you actually thinking about what you could have done better. So again, then it had to be a pretty self-reflective practice if you did really want to develop. But again, a little bit like Glasgow School of Sport, it was just, here's what we need to make sure we get done today. Just go and do it by any means. So when I came here, I think the internships that I had, they were a good experience. But then I was quite keen to make sure that the interns that I was bringing in, again, they're sacrificing so much by being here that I want to make sure that they got the best experience possible. So then these are some of the main things that I considered. How much mentorship can I give them? How much individualization can I give them? And can actually maybe give them some sort of action plan. It's not just about them turning up every day and doing the job, but actually having some sort of, the same way we create some sort of long-term athletic development program for the players, why can we not have that for the staff? So then actually building some sort of curriculum that we follow and adhere to. So then all these ideas, put them down on paper, and this document that we have now that is our curriculum, by no means is it the finished product, but it's a ever developing document where every year we implement it. I try and get their feedback. If they have any feedback, I try and implement it as much as possible, because at the end of the day, this is for them. It's not for me. And then again, on top of that as well, actually, like I said, I'm still a very young practitioner. I haven't had so much mentorship in my own career so far. So I'm also conscious that I know so little in the grand scheme of things, and that I also need to be learning. It's not just a case of them. So I do a lot of personal CPD, but then I realized that actually this is something that I should open up to the group. So with the interns, I kind of disguise that it's for them, but really it's for me as much as it is them. And I'm sure sometimes they don't realize it, but I walk away from some of the CPDs having learned far more than they have. So yeah, like I said, all these ideas, I wrote them down on a piece of paper to create a curriculum, trying to give it as much structure as possible, and very organized and very structured. So for me, that structure really helps. When I was creating this curriculum, again, my mind works best when I think about what is the end goal and reverse engineer from that. So again, my mind was, what are we actually trying to create here? Obviously, when we're working with players on their long-term athletic development, we're trying to prepare them for the demands of first-team football. We're trying to make sure that they're strong, they're robust, they can tolerate these demands of the working senior environment. So similar to that, I kind of reversed engineered the demands of being a fitness coach, a physical performance coach in the real world setting, and worked from there. So part of being a strength and conditioning coach in the real world setting, you need to understand warm-ups and athletic developments. You need to understand tactical periodization. You need to understand monitoring and testing. You need to understand, all these different technical elements, but also then you, from a personality perspective, you need to be competent, you need to be organized, you need to be proactive. You need to understand the sport itself. You need to have the soft skills. You need all these technical, but also personality traits to be successful. So with all this in mind, we created this program. I'm quite open about the curriculum. So then if anyone has any more specific questions, they're more than welcome to get in touch. But I think the most important thing for me was to have some sort of quarterly development meeting with the interns. So quarterly throughout the season, we sit down once every 3 months and we do some sort of SWOT analysis. My thought process was I think it would be really good to monitor development, but as you can imagine, it's such a subjective thing that's hard to actually objectively say that you've got better over time. So I still haven't found a perfect way to objectively measure progress for our strength conditioning coaches, but we use this SWOT analysis where we sit down and we look at our strengths and weaknesses and any other general notes to identify where they are now and where they want to be next time we sit down to have this quarterly development meeting. So we sit down once every 3 months. We have these meetings. The idea is that for the first half of the year, us full-time members of staff, we present to them. So like I mentioned, in order for them to be competent in this environment, they need to understand about monitoring, testing, athletic developments, how to design a gym session. Obviously, these are things that they probably already know, but we need to make sure that they understand this environment, and we try and share our knowledge as much as possible for the first half of the year when we're presenting to them. And then for the second half of the year, we flip that. So then for the second half of the year, based off their SWOT analysis, where they've identified their strengths and weaknesses from a technical perspective, then actually they're presenting to us and the rest of the group. So sometimes we have guys coming in and some of their strengths are around the realm of nutrition. So perfect. Present to us about nutrition, so we can make their strengths even bigger strengths, but also share that knowledge. And again, like I said, I walk away from this having learned so much a lot of the time. But then also, once we've identified a few of their weaknesses, maybe they don't feel so competent when it comes to monitoring performance, whether it's using GPS data, they're not so comfortable again, or they're not so competent with it. Then again, we use it as an opportunity where they make themselves vulnerable, but them going away and doing a bunch of research to prepare for a presentation, they learn so much in the process, and then them actually sharing and applying that information in practice, I think really helps with their own development. So yeah, that's a curriculum we kind of follow. First half of the year, we present to them. Second half of the year, they present to us. Within that, we also have what we call now classroom CPDs. So this is where once a week at least, we just jump in one of the conference rooms, one of the video rooms, and we just throw a webinar on the TV. We sit down, we listen, we watch, we pause it in between to have discussions, and again, just promoting this growth environment. At first, it was very mixed. If we just saw a really good presentation or we saw that you guys uploaded a really interesting podcast, we'd throw it up on the TV. But over time, we've started to add a little bit of structure to that. It's semi-structured, where now we have some sort of curriculum where for the first month, we're just looking at biomechanics. For the second month, we're looking at the anatomy of the hip. And each week, we just find, you go on YouTube and you'll find some doctor that you've never heard of giving you the best 20-minute presentation on the hips. And again, you walk away having learned so much. So this is where I realized that I know so little. So I don't think I should be the person presenting in these small classroom CPDs that we have. We just try and find resources from the best in the world in those topics, and we sit down in a room. Maybe if we're lucky, someone brings in some pastries, and then we sit around that and listen in. And again, try and have an open discussion about that. But yeah, I don't know if I've summarized that well enough, but yeah, quarterly meetings, presentations for the first half of the year, second half of the year, and then once a week we sit down in a conference room. This is where I realize as well, like here at Malmo, we're really lucky from a facilities perspective. I don't know if you're so familiar, but here at Malmo FF, we have our stadium in the center of the city and we have our training pitches around it. So everyone from the first team all the way down to under nines is based in the same camp, in the same facilities. So in the same corridor, you have me on one end, and then you have the under 14s fitness coach. So for us four to quickly ask, okay, during this next week, are there any 2 periods where we're all free for 30 minutes, 45 minutes? Yeah, okay, perfect. Let's jump in one of the classrooms, one of the conference rooms, and throw on a video. It works really well. But then I realize maybe in some other environments that's not so easily accessible. But yeah.
I think what you've done there is essentially answered one of my previous questions about the culture at Malmo.
Okay.
Because a lot of the things that you spoke about there is all around improving as practitioners, but you're giving us the nuts and bolts on how you actually do that. And I think a lot of coaches, especially anyone that leads a team, will be taking a lot of the factors away from what you've spoken about there. I love the fact of sitting around watching videos and essentially upskilling together and having conversations about it. I think that's a really powerful task that probably a lot of people don't do. They might blame it on time, but like you said, I'm sure practitioners, if they could have that conversation of when can we get half an hour, when can we get 40 minutes together, I'm sure they can find it if they wanted to. But I think there's some really good stuff in there, mate. I really appreciate you sharing that. Flicking back to, we spoke about that a lot there about the coach development side and your experiences at Malmo in terms of the coaching side. On the players' side, in terms of the LTAD program, I'm keen to get your thoughts on and maybe some of the factors that you've put in place with your background, with this multi-sport background that you've got, that have developed the work that of some of the coaches that we spoke about already that have worked in the academy at Malmo. What have you done and what has been the process to sort of kicking the program on forward again?
Yeah, so I still remember when I first arrived, it was presented to me as a bit of a blank canvas project. I think there had been a little bit of turnover in staff, so they wanted a little bit of stability. And as a result of that turnover, maybe they lost a little bit of their identity and culture there. So that's where coming in, I had a lot of freedom to implement my philosophy. And a big part of my philosophy is around mastering the basics, especially when it comes down to academy level. The amount of conversations I have with players where they're so focused on that final 1%, and it's like, hang on, we're not even close to the initial 99%, you know? Little conversations like what supplements should I be taking? And it's like, hang on. I'm pretty sure I overheard you speaking in Swedish saying that you were up until 2 a.m. playing FIFA, my friend. What do you mean supplements? Forget about that. So my philosophy is a lot around mastering the basics. And I think from a more technical standpoint, I think that comes around making athletes strong and then also robust. Robust has 2 different avenues. I mean, on one avenue, you have robust in terms of physical literacy and technical competency, making them actually efficient at getting in and out of certain postures. But then on the other side of things, we have robustness in the sense of being able to tolerate a demanding training and playing schedule. So with this in mind, blank canvas, and this being my philosophy, coming in, it was about, okay, can we make every athlete stronger? Can we make them technically competent? And from there, we can also review the training schedule. We can make sure that we're replicating the demands of the first team environment. That way, when players make that jump up, it's not any major new stimulus for them. It's just the ball is moving a little bit faster. But then in terms of all the other small things that we can control as practitioners, in terms of sometimes you play 90 minutes and then on match day +1, +2, you're doing another high intensity session. That type of stuff we can replicate. So coming in, when I first arrived in the academy, we had essentially 2.5 fitness coaches, 2 full-time, 1 part-time. Over the 3.5 years, I've pushed that to essentially 4.5 full-time fitness coaches, which means here at Malmo, we work with under 19s, under 17s, under 16s, under 14s, which means now that every age group has their own full-time fitness coach. So from there, we were able to progress. Previously, I think every team was being exposed to 1 gym session a week. Now every team has not only 2 gym sessions a week, but more individualized gym sessions a week. These programs are very competency-based. So it doesn't matter what your chronological age is. We do a movement screening test at the start of the season and quarterly throughout the season. And based off your movement score, you get assigned a group on our progression curriculum, and then you follow a program that is suited to your technical competency. In terms of then the gym work, I guess you can imagine we focus on getting them stronger, but not just in terms of raw weights that they're shifting. It's also a case of how competent are they at the exercise? Can they do a bilateral? Can they do a unilateral? Obviously, can they do all the key movement patterns? Can they actually do these key movement patterns whilst having a full-on conversation with someone? Or do they have to be 100% focused on that one spot on the ground? Otherwise, they go tumbling over. Can we really test them in terms of the complexity of the exercises we're doing? So now, over the 3.5 years, I've built an exercise library where for every key movement pattern, whether it's upper body, lower body, rotational, plyometric, in every single realm, we have a progression list where maybe have exercise level 1 all the way down to potentially exercise level 20. And again, the complexity of every exercise is improving as the level increases. But then the thing is that all of us fitness coaches, we work from the same document. We work from the exact same exercise library. So when I first started, it was from like level 1 to level 5 in terms of the progression lists. I found that a little bit boring, so we changed it to an animal progression list. So I tried to make it so all the animals were blue and white, which is Malmo FF's color, but I very quickly ran out of ideas there. But I can say level 1 is a blue jay, it's a bird, and then level 5 is a shark, to also give the players that understanding of, okay, as I'm progressing in animals, the animal is getting a little bit scarier, just to make the players also realize the animal's a bit stronger and the animal's also a little bit more robust. But yeah, so based off their competency, the players are bucket grouped into this animal progression list, and then each team works off this exercise library, and that means that the exercises the under 14s are doing in some ways are very similar to the same exercises maybe the under 17s are doing, as we're working from the same document. The only thing that changes is potentially the load or the complexity of the exercises, but it has this benefit of every time a player moves up a squad, it's not that they're exposed to a completely new stimulus. They've worked from the same pathway, the same curriculum prior to this. So it's not a new major shock to the system. The only thing that increases is maybe the load of the exercise. But yeah, on the gym side of the things, we have this curriculum that everyone follows, and it shares a quite holistic pathway. This also then translates over to the pitch. So when I first arrived, the warm-up philosophy was essentially that. It was a case of, can we get the athletes warm and ready for the upcoming session? Again, looking back at my work and my mentorship from Rodri Lloyd and John Oliver and those guys, I quickly made the realization that we could be doing more. So one of the first things I did actually when I arrived is I didn't ban the word warm-up, but I tried to really highlight to the players and coaches that we're not doing warm-ups, we're doing athletic development sessions. So the same way Usain Bolt does a 1 hour sprint session, we're essentially trying to do the same, but we're just splitting this up into 15-minute segments throughout the week. So trying to make them move away from this idea of a warm-up where you can be quite passive and you can just slowly use that as an opportunity to wake up and prepare yourself for the upcoming session, and actually trying to make them realize that from the moment the athletic development starts, they're here to work. So again, going back to the robustness and the technical competency element of my philosophy, we use this athletic development time. If we're lucky, we have 15 minutes. If not, we have around 10 minutes. We quickly go through a 2 or 3 minute ramp process. We look to educate the athletes on the mechanics that we want to focus on that day. As you can imagine, then we reverse engineer from the tactical periodization and the session design. If it's an intensive session and we know there's going to be 150, 200 change of directions in this session, most of them are likely to be cuts. Then with that information in the athletic development session, in a very closed environment, we'll teach them the technical components of cutting. Okay, this is the shin angle you want. This is the body angle that you want. This is what we want you to do with your knees. This is what we want you to do with your arms. This is how we want you. This is the direction we want you to produce force in. We'll actually use then that 5-minute segment to just teach them the mechanics in a really controlled and low chaos environment. And then with the final 15, with the last 5 minutes we have of the athletic development, then we use that as an opportunity to reinforce those mechanics, but in a slightly higher chaotic environment. So when I first arrived, my philosophy was, can we just take them where they are now and get them to the most complex version of that exercise? So on our speed days, okay, can we progress from A skips to B skips? Can we do flutter kicks into a B skip? And we push for really high complexity exercises. But then what I realized was, as soon as you included a ball, all of those mechanics that they did perfectly in isolation and in low chaos, as soon as you included a ball, all of that went out of the window. That 10 minutes of hard work and active coaching, forget about as soon as you include the ball. So then this is where my philosophy shifted a little bit. And actually, I kind of realized that maybe we need to work more on how much information they can process while still implementing these basic fundamental mechanics. So this is where we've shifted a little bit now. And now that's where, actually, if you're familiar with Matt Taberner's control to chaos RTP model, this is where we've actually adopted and adapted a lot of that, where it's about how much chaos, how much cognitive information can you process whilst doing these mechanics. So then we'll always try and do some sort of fun competitive game. So in that example where we teach them cutting, then maybe we finish off with a game of British Bulldog, where, for those familiar, you're running out, and don't worry, you're not going to get WWE clotheslined by anyone. It's just a tag, but you're running out, and then you have to avoid someone that's trying to tag you. So you need to process all that visual stimulus that you're receiving when you're getting approached by an opponent, and use that slightly more chaotic environment to re-implement those mechanics that we just reinforced for the past 5 minutes. So then the idea there was that if, like I said, if they're going to make 150 cuts in the upcoming session, if we can make them just 5% more efficient at the action of cutting, then for each cut, they save 5% more energy, which means then accumulate that over 150 actions. By the end of the session, not only are they going to save more energy, but they're going to be more efficient in the movement. So in one sense, the intensity is going to increase, but then the amount of fatigue after the session is going to decrease, which then means they need to spend less time recovering, which means then they're more fresh and prepared for the upcoming sessions. And then actually, instead of the previous warm-ups that were in place, now we can actually see some sort of long-term benefit to this 15-minute window. I think I did the maths. 15 minutes, 5 times a week throughout a season, that was actually accumulating to 3,300 minutes of potential work. And I saw that window of opportunity. So then these are the small things that we changed to progress the fitness department, but then also to try and change the culture of and the mentality of the players, to actually stop them from being a little bit passive and robotic at the start of the sessions, to actually getting them to realize that, okay, the moment I step out onto the pitch, I'm here to work. And again, everything that I do is either going to make me stronger or it's going to make me more robust, and that's going to prepare me for the demands of the first team environment.
That's the serious power of compounding as well, isn't it? We're getting that work over a large period of time. That was absolutely brilliant, Miguel. Thank you so much for going into the detail that you've got into there. And I know we could dive in further, but I'm just conscious of time. But I really appreciate you coming on. I know you put some information out on your LinkedIn. Is that where you'd encourage people to go and sort of connect with you? Is there anything anywhere else across socials that you post information?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is the best. For many years in my career, I was not so active on it, and now I realize how many wasted opportunities that's resulted in. So I'm a lot more active on LinkedIn, and I try and post as much, and I try and share as much information on there. So for sure, like I said before, I'm a pretty open book on everything I do. So if anyone does have any questions, I will always try and take the time to reply and share what I can to help whoever needs it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for coming on and giving up your time.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Like I mentioned before, when I first started in this industry, I had 6 months to learn, and then I was thrown into the deep end. So when I was thrown into that deep end, and you didn't really have an actual mentor to learn from, my first course of action was to find resources like the one that you share, where someone like me had no access to someone like Tony Strudwick, someone that was in charge of Man United, but through the resource that you provide, the product you provide, then that became so easily accessible. And I have to say, you helped me a lot on my journey, even though you don't know about it. But yeah, I appreciate a lot what you do as well. Thank you.
That's great to hear. Thanks for the feedback, Miguel.
Top stuff.